What's up, guys? Jake here with a quick message before we get on to our show. Please make sure that you like this video below, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, and also make sure that you sign up for notifications. With your guys' help, we can ensure that all of the guests get the right attention and audience that they deserve. I thank all of you guys for joining me along this very adventurous journey, and now let's get on to the show. All right, everybody, welcome in. It looks like you have made it through the guest list. You're sitting here with your host, Jake Gallen, and Andrew Gardner, who is the co-founder and COO of Humanly. Humanly automates candidate screening, scheduling, and engagement at scale. Humanly is also accelerated by Y Combinator. I don't know if any of you guys are pretty familiar with it. I know all of my tech nerds that follow me definitely are familiar with it. It's essentially a startup incubator that has had a lot of success in seed funding and business and networking opportunities. And some of the successful companies to come out of there are Stripe, Airbnb, Coinbase for all my crypto nerds out there, and Twitch. So Andrew, thank you for coming on.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Jake. I appreciate getting connected here and excited to chat.
Yeah, I've actually never spoken with somebody who's gone through the Y Combinator process. I've heard so many good things about it. You know, I continually hear about it and people rave about it. But before we get into that and talk about how Humanly is going to be one of these next superstar companies to come out of there, let's dive into your past. And before we go into that, I also want to thank Jordan, who's probably listening to this, for setting this up. He's been helpful, and as we were talking before this, API provides so much value after college rather than in college. So it's cool to see how it goes. And let's just start off with your college experience. Where did you attend college? What was your mindset like? Were you even considering anything down the automated HR industry?
Yeah. It's been kind of a crazy ride. I'll try not to get too far off tangent here, but yeah, college for me, it was awesome. So I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, so out on the Central Coast, just north of Santa Barbara, and honestly loved it. It was an awesome experience, and I actually grew up in a college town. So I grew up in Davis, where UC Davis is here in Northern California. So I very much embodied the college experience going in, and Cal Poly had a business school, which was something I was very focused on doing going in. So it was a natural fit. Actually played football in college there as well. We won't get too deep into that because I have some scars from that, even though it's close to 15 years ago now. But yeah, so great experience, great education, met amazing people, some of my best friends, whether it's API or not. Had an awesome time, learned a lot. And the funny thing is, I guess I did dip my toes in entrepreneurship coming out of school. So my older brother, who's 3 years older than me, he had founded an e-commerce startup out of his dorm room at UC San Diego. And he was 3 years ahead of me. So by the time I was getting ready to graduate and finish up at Cal Poly, he had scaled the business to a point where he needed his second or third person to come on and help. So my first, 6 or 7 years out of school, I was working at a less than 5-person startup. And got thrown in. It wasn't like a software company, and it certainly wasn't this like high growth venture backed company that Humanly is now. It was more of, I guess you'd call like lifestyle business. But certainly it was one of those things where like you had a million things to do in a day. You just needed to get done whatever it was to get to the next day. And, it didn't matter title. It didn't matter what it was you did. It just, everyone pitched in and made sure that, the lights were on the very next day.
I absolutely love the startup culture. I've ventured down it a few times myself. I had an antique store and actually tried to go down the app route. I tried to create a ticket verification platform out here in Vegas. And like you said, there is a few of us, and every single one of us had the same positions. It was just kind of like a controlled chaos in a sense. But I feel like that's the way that entrepreneurship's evolved, is you kind of just have to get thrown in there, and you have to be vulnerable, and you have to put your reputation or your capital on the line to understand what is required to succeed.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we've seen, and it's funny, I joke about being like the fluff co-founder, because with all the amazing people in Silicon Valley and part of Y Combinator, like I'm not of technical background. So I'm on the business side. So I manage revenue and sales. I've been in sales my whole career. And so, but I guess, one thing we've learned in this process is you really have to lean on literally anyone and everyone in your network you've ever known, right? The only way you're going to become successful is if you're able to build on success, like little wins in the process, right? And I'm not just talking about people in your network as employees, or, I'm talking advisors, investors, like literally anyone and everyone that's going to give you 5 or 10 minutes to listen to your idea. That could be your next investor. That could be your next customer, right? Which is going to exponentially move your company forward. And so one piece of advice I tell other entrepreneurs, maybe just coming out of school, is just like, I don't care if it's a parent's friend or who it is, like anyone that lends an ear and wants to give you feedback, you listen, because you never know where it's going to turn into. And you need that to be successful. You need every one of those to come through.
Yeah, I kind of went through those trials and tribulations myself. When I started when we did Chameleon Verify Network, one of our fears was, and I'll kind of get your opinion on this too, is that we didn't lean on enough people per se, and we didn't reach out to places like Y Combinator because we were afraid of losing control of the company. Because I hear some of those horror stories where you give up too much equity and you get one, you give the investor one board seat and they somehow turn it into 4 board seats and you lose power and everything like that. But when I started the podcast, I definitely used what you were portraying, where I leaned on every single person in my network, whether they were from literally Hebrew school and middle school, all the way up to like my last few business adventures and all throughout the Vegas community. And it's exceedingly turned out well for doing that. And it's weird because we put up these like mental blocks of like, oh, we don't want to reach out to them because we don't want to cast ourselves as like somebody who's kind of like needy or is like asking for help and forgiveness and things like this. But it turns out more people are actually willing to support you just because you're going on some sort of adventure and they get to kind of ride the journey with you.
Yeah, and I think one thing we kind of had to dispel the notion on, and we continue to challenge ourselves, is like, for every Airbnb or every Coinbase, like these Y Combinator companies that have like this world-changing idea that no one has, like Airbnb renting someone else's apartment back then. And I know Vegas is very focused on hospitality and so forth. Like that literally changed the world, the idea itself, right? And I think one thing we've challenged ourselves is like, you can't stunt your growth and not go out and communicate what it is you're working on out of fear that someone's going to steal it. Because the idea is for every one Airbnb and Instacart and one of those that like is this life-changing idea, there's a million other successful companies that maybe the idea wasn't Airbnb, but they out-executed the hell out of everyone else, right? It's not the most life-changing idea, but it's a matter of going out and finding stakeholders, finding customers, building the right products, getting the right feedback. And so that's what we've been trying to do, is like not fall into the trap of like, oh, I'm too nervous to go pitch someone this idea because they're either going to take it or it's going to lose its luster. No, literally anyone and everyone open to hearing you and giving you feedback, go do it. One of the best piece of advice we got before we even started on the Human Lead journey is like, go out and interview 60 people in the industry you're looking to build this idea in. And as long as 50% of them tell you not to F off and it's not the worst idea in the world, you're onto something, right? And that bar is not that high, right? But yeah, so that was a big focus of ours early days. And we continue as we're continuing to grow what it is the product is doing. We're challenging ourselves to not like be precious with it, is fearing that someone else around us is going to do something, right? Just trust ourselves and out execute everyone.
Yeah, that's the benefit of where technology is pushing society and all of these different communication patterns, is it's basically creating a transparency layer that everyone could kind of peer in and understand everyone's insight, and you can get more feedback as long as you're willing to go that kind of route. And along your guys' journey, before you found Y Combinator, did you go through any hurdles or any sort of transparent layers that maybe didn't work and that you had to overcome?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so like there is so much to kind of unpack our early day story. And, I think one thing to start with, so myself and my co-founder Preem, who's our CEO, he's my main partner in crime. We both have two young kids, right? So we both have 5-year-olds and 2-year-olds. We both had really good paying jobs. We both have mortgages. We were supporting our families, so for us, like before we even went full-time on Humanly. Like we had to be really strategic about like being able to like even start the journey, right? Like we were moonlighting at night and we had to go out and like fundraise and get people to believe in our idea before we even could commit to it full-time ourselves, because we couldn't, you might hear my 2-year-old in the background crying, but I couldn't feed her ramen, and we couldn't move into some studio apartment that many founders like straight out of school, or they have flexibility to do that, right? And every founding story has its own, like, so I'm by no means saying that like we have a harder road than anyone else. Everyone's road is just different, right? But I think in that journey there's so many pitfalls, so many things to like, and even to this day, being a seed stage company, having raised over $1 million, looking at doing a Series A later next year, like for all the successes we've had, that there's the ups and downs of every single day that you're fighting through. And by no means the first thing they tell you in Y Combinator is like, just because we offered you a spot in the program or just because you got in, like that's not success, right? Just because you fundraised over $1 million, that's not success. Like success is something much greater, and you're going to have to work your butt off to get there.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of competition out there, but you just have to understand that most people are actually in it together. And a lot of these places, a lot of these companies, ideas, they're not as necessarily as a zero-sum game as some people like it make it out to be. Like Uber, there's still Lyft, like there's somebody in some of these different sectors that's kind of a winner take all, like Facebook and Google and Bitcoin, I kind of think is that in the cryptocurrency space.
Yeah.
But a lot of these like outlier applications onto life, it necessarily doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. And there's so much different idea and just different perceptions of the world that can be applied to your company as long as we collab with others.
Yeah, and HR technology is a perfect example of that, right? And for those that are in hiring or run companies of your listeners, that hiring touches basically every business, right? But really, the key here is like, as someone, an outsider looking in at the HR tech landscape, like it seems very crowded, right? And we hear this all the time from VCs that we're trying to fundraise from, and they're like, oh, why are you fascinated with solving something in HR? There's a million of these companies that are trying to do the same thing. But really, when you double click in, exactly what you just said, Jake, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of companies solving, but there's very specific sets of challenges that we're looking to take on that we feel as a founding team and as a product, we've positioned ourselves to be the right team to go ahead and take on those challenges and fit really well into the overall infrastructure, the other, the applicant tracking systems, the Workdays of the world. Like for us, it's not just about building a product, but it's building into an ecosystem where we play nice with Workday the same way we play nice with Greenhouse and Lever. And, without us playing nice with them, the recruiters being asked to do something radically different and they're never going to do it, right? So it's minimizing the amount of workflow change for the recruiter while providing a huge impact through what it is your product does.
And you guys seem to be set in a perfect scenario. I mean, COVID, it's unfortunate that COVID happened, but it's kind of accelerating these trends that were happening in society and kind of cutting out a lot of the inadequacies of some of the, I guess you could call it, antiqued infrastructure in society. And now we see more like podcasts that are going remote. There's remote work is about to, I think it's going to stay. A lot of these tech companies, and not even just tech companies, any sort of company wants to implement it because it's cost effective on both sides and saves time and creates efficiency as well as productivity. So you guys are kind of set in a perfect place, because now in an age of society where everyone wants to save time, the product not only saves time, but it also, from what I've seen, is that it cuts out a lot of the fluff, or some of the people who are just sending out 300 applications a day, no matter what the job is.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. And it's been like a ebb and flow journey, the same way that COVID has had waves, right? The first wave. And I feel like, when we finished Y Combinator back in March, like the middle of March, literally right when, I remember the day, it was 2 weeks before Y Combinator finished, is the day that the NBA shut down and basically everything then shut down, right? And I'll be honest, like that first 2.5, 3 months of COVID, it was literally the end of the world in recruiting. Like we have an advisor that knows the space really well, that 40% of Bay Area recruiters, 40%, so we're talking over 18,000 people, were either laid off or furloughed within that first 2 months of COVID hitting, right? And I know there's some hospitality and restaurants, so by no means am I saying recruiting got hit harder than anyone else, but it was right there. Like everyone was like, hey, what is happening? We're pausing hiring. We need to figure that, like, we have no idea how long this thing is going to be. And I know we're still on this journey to figure out like when we're going to turn a corner, right? But I think we have more certainty around it, right? And I think what happened was, so it was like these 2 months of like just utter chaos. And we have competitors in the HR space that like literally were hemorrhaging money, like lost millions of dollars in revenue, ended up having to basically either sell or go out of business, or, and they had really high, overhead costs. They had large teams and all this, right? We were fortunate that we were very early days. So for us, we had a really good runway. We had a lot of cash in the bank. So we were able to kind of weather the storm, pause all our customers, say, hey, we don't want to take money from you if you're not seeing value. Let's just pause. We don't want to lose you. Let's revisit this once we have clarity into what this is going to be, right? And what we've seen is after those kind of 2 months of the world ending, I think everyone realized like, hey, we haven't figured this out, but we need to get back to doing some type of normal business, right? And many of these companies have to get back to hiring, right? And I think what they realize is having these very large human recruiting teams that handle everything and have no automation and no built-in technology to their workflow is no longer really sustainable, right? And so as we've seen, and what's accelerated the way you're talking about is really understanding that organizations now believe the future, or the now, is a combination of automation as well as humans in the workforce, specifically in recruiting. And so we're right there bridging the gap between, hey, we're not here to replace anyone's job. We're here to manage a lot of the non-value add tasks as part of recruiting so that you can focus on the more impactful tasks that's going to drive more ROI for you and your organization, right? And that's where we've seen acceleration since, early summer. We've grown 6 or 8x in revenue and brought on some amazing partners, and we're growing from there.
Wow, congratulations. As society progresses, and we said a lot of the mundane positions are going to be cut out, and there's going to be new positions that are created, because I think where society's trending, there's going to be a lot more creativity that's needed and required for all of these different positions, especially in the tech space. And if you're out on the cutting edge of whatever industry that you're in, does humanly, is it specified for a specific economic demographic, or can this be applied to different creative positions as well?
Yeah, really great question. So generally, we're on this journey where early days here, our product really fits. We call it the kind of high volume hiring scenarios, right? So those are roles that if the average job in the United States gets 150 applicants, we're looking at roles that have 200 applicants or more, right? Where there's just this glut of, and unfortunately with COVID and unemployment, that like increased exponentially across the board in many industries, right? But it's safe to say that the more people applying, the more screening happening, the more value that Humanly provides, because we're helping to automate or streamline much of the interactions at the early stage in the process, help that candidate pool have a really great experience, and get filtered down to then get over to the recruiting team to spend the right time with the right candidates, right? So I'd say right now it's, entry to mid-level jobs, white collar jobs, healthcare jobs, financial service. So a lot of kind of entry-level jobs right after college. We're working with a couple large accounting firms doing their internship hiring as well. So yeah, entry and mid-level, but it's more focused, less about the industry, more focused on those criteria around the high volume nature of the hiring.
Okay, yeah, that's what I wanted to bring you on, because that's a perfect scenario, or it's a perfect situation for Vegas, especially because there are a lot of these entry-level jobs that you need requirement, especially you could go even the same of like a cocktail server or a bartender, where you get literally thousands of applications. When I applied at Omnia 5 years ago, I've worked there before the pandemic, there was 5,000 servers who applied. So wow. I know part of that, there's part of a personal screening with that as well. But I know on the back end, I'm sure there's some sort of application process, or what is that kind of like process? Yeah. Is it just questions?
Yeah. So the workflow, it's actually pretty simple in a sense that, in part, for some organizations, we're streamlining some of the application process. So looking at, like if you walk into a career fair, you can use your cell phone to apply by having a humanly interaction on your phone. But generally the workflow is, hey, you get 5,000 applicants for the job. So if you had applied to one of our customers, Moss Adams, which is a 4,000 person accounting firm, if you had applied to one of their internships or staff roles, their entry-level accounting roles, every candidate this past cycle had a humanly interaction. So they apply, they give their information instead of, 75, 80% of them never hearing back or getting an automated email that says, thanks for applying, but no thanks. Every candidate is then delivered a humanly interaction. So they apply, they either get emailed or text messaged a humanly interaction. It's honestly a conversation. So that's where the AI comes in. We ask them a set of questions. We provide them more information about Moss Adams or whoever the hiring organization is. It's really two-way in nature, not only to find out if the candidate's a good fit for the role, but also to prep you on what to expect for the role. Because a lot of these entry and mid-level jobs, part of the problem is you're getting all these candidates. We've now made the barrier to apply so low that they might show up for the job day one and not really even know what it is they're going to be asked to do, right? The hours or I got to imagine as a server, it's not the most glamorous thing in the world a lot of times, right? You think of the glamorous parts, but you don't really have a sense of everything that goes along with it, right? So it's understanding that Jake's a good fit for the role, but also giving Jake a better understanding of what to expect on the role so they know what's going in and they're going to have a better tenure then at the hiring organization. And then the key there is after that interaction, we then integrate and sync all that back into the systems that the hiring company is using. So really it all happens, it integrates with Google Calendar, so they're scheduled for the next step in the interview process.
Right. So it's adding some depth on both sides for the employer and for the applicant, because
exactly. Now instead of, 90% of those, so if 5,000 applied, 4,999 didn't get the job. But the reality is Omni's going to have to hire someone in a week or two because it's such high turnover. They can now go back to that same pool of candidates that maybe there's what we call our silver medalists. So those that weren't quite a perfect fit, but were good enough to stay engaged. And hey, maybe they now have that certificate, or maybe they move to an area in Las Vegas that's closer so they don't mind commuting, right? I don't know how bad traffic is in Las Vegas, but the idea is that in these high volume scenarios, it's not just about the one person who gets the job, but it's all those other candidates that now can be more than just a resume and know that in 3 months or 6 months, they might get re-engaged by that company because they could be a fit for that role.
I think you hit the nail right on the head about the resume, because I think when you think of resume, I think of like 1970s job screening. Yeah. It's so out of touch with what reality is, because somebody's resume is literally on their Twitter account or their Instagram account. Like you could find it easily, but nowadays you need to find more depth to the person and kind of like the different intangibles that can be tested, like grit and consistency. And are they a complacent person? Are they content? Do they aspire to be other things?
Yeah, no, totally. I absolutely get it and totally agree. I mean, one of the things we're playing with too is as we're on this journey from a product perspective. So myself, my co-founder Prem, we all came from a post-hire company. So we all worked at a company called Tiny Pulse that was focused on employee engagement. So more gauging how happy employees are, maybe how communication or different areas in the organization, strengths and weaknesses, right? So we see there being a future where we can look at post-hire data in the HR systems like a Workday, right? Or a performance management system and say like, hey, just the best resume isn't necessarily, like if Jake has the best resume, that doesn't mean Jake's going to be the best person to hire for this team, for this set of tasks, like just because they look on paper to be the best, right? As you're talking about, there's so much more that goes into it. So how do we look at this data we already have about the team? So maybe leadership or communication or some of these other things are much more important than just 3 years experience, right? So how do we look at that post-hire data, tie that back to the questions we're asking in the screening, and identify that Jake's not only the most qualified candidate, but they're going to be the best team member to join what it is the team currently has in place. And that's really the holy grail, is when we can start looking at our hiring decisions, being focused on data that our team on the back end is collecting about performance management and engagement.
That's so perfect. With there's such an emphasis now on community around the employees, and I think it's called like conscious capitalism. The kind of idea that you need to invest in your employees, and that will therefore create more output than kind of trying to penny pinch whatever company you're doing, whether you slash prices or kind of like in Vegas' sense, you create resort fees. Like if you can create a better salesperson and invest in the community, then you're definitely going to have a much greater output and everyone's going to be happier, therefore.
100%. Yeah. And this notion that like for decades we've all had, and even more than probably centuries we've had, that like the longer we can keep someone in, like, but we call it butt in seat, the longer we can keep Jake doing his job, the more value he's going to provide to his company, right? But we totally like dispel that notion, right? Just because someone is there, they could be disengaged for 5 out of the 10 years they're there, and they're almost doing more to hurt the company than they are, right? So the question is, hey, instead of just how do we get this employee to hang on for as long as possible, the question is, hey, how do we get them to ramp up as quick as possible so the time to impact is shorter? And how do we get the most out of them, knowing that, hey, for most jobs, the average tenure, like the average tenure at tech companies right now is like 12 to 16 months, or I think it's like 18 months actually, right? Knowing that you're only going to pretty much get someone for 18 months, and then it takes them 6 months to get fully ramped anyways, you're going to get a year of them, right? So like, how do we make that year most effective, and then give them the best experience in that process, so that when they go onto Google or Facebook, or they remember Tiny Pulse, and they'll be your biggest advocate. There's no reason why an employee can't have an alumni experience of a company the same way you're proud of being a Rebel, right? Or I'm proud of being a Mustang, right? And paying it forward that way.
Oh, that is such a great insight. Do these employers, do they lean on you guys for the actual candidate that they should hire? Or is it just like after you go through that screening process and you're like, okay, we cut down the field from 300 to 30. Do these employers then ask you, who do you think is the best candidate for out of that batch?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say they necessarily ask, but it certainly is a journey, right? And I think the nature of what we do, it's challenging a lot of these employers to think about things they haven't really been forced to think about before. Like, hey, what does make a really good candidate, right? And like, what does want, like, is that consistent from one of my recruiters, say in the Pacific Northwest, to my recruiter down in Los Angeles, to my recruiter out in Arizona, right? Like how do we like sit down and say, hey, how do we measure this consistently in a way that provides an equitable experience? And really, diversity is a big focus of ours as well. We have a page on our website, and we have some great people involved to focus on that. But the idea is like, how do we like really better understand what it is that makes someone a successful Moss Adams employee? And then how do we map that back to our interviewing process, whether that's screening through Humanly, whether that's in our actual interviews we're doing, right? Kind of the next step in our journey from a product perspective is not just automating and streamlining the screening, but we actually have an integration now with Zoom that we're able to sit in on meetings like this, transcribe actual interviews that are happening, and provide analytics around the questions interviewers are asking, biased words that are being used, talk to listen ratios, how quick. I'm talking probably over 150 words per minute, which trends negatively for English as a second language learners. So there's a lot of insights in this process that we're coming and partnering with these companies and saying, hey, we have a process, it's been this way for a long time. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the perfect way. Like, how do we go about getting the most out of this? How do we plug automation into where it needs to be? And how do we make the human process more effective, knowing that it will always be human?
Do you think the hiring process is going to eventually be I don't say dependent, but the majority of the interview process is going to move over to a video conferencing platform like Zoom instead of an in-person interview?
Yeah, I think everyone's kind of relying on that today, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how it bounces back. I mean, there's certainly industries like we're working with a large employer in home care, right? So, they have aides going in home with, like, there's certain, being a server, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of industries where just like going in person, if it was possible right now, just gives you so much more insight into someone and whether they'll be successful. So I don't think it's ever going to be fully replaced or like, there's no perfect answer, right? It's like, it's better to sit down and say, hey, what is my company? What makes an employee successful in the role? What is going to make them the best team member? And how do we then provide them this interviewing experience, whether that's via Zoom or in person or a combination of both? Or how do we provide the best experience in the process?
It's interesting. I'm just thinking about this idea while we were having this conversation, where a lot of the interview process, it's automated, and then you get hired through, let's say, a Zoom conference, and then that employee actually never even walks into the building of the place, but then he could still be a highly productive person. It's such an interesting futuristic scenario that I think is going to become popularized probably in the near future.
Yeah. No. And I think the first step is like, again, like, how do we sit down and understand what it is that makes us as an employer uniquely special, right? And how do we have that very forward in the process? And maybe for some organizations, it's, hey, we don't need to see them in person. Zoom's enough, right? And we're going to be able to then onboard them via Zoom, and we have access to Slack and different, with text messaging, and we have ways of supporting and onboarding them through that, right? And I think the key from a hiring company's perspective, the way we look at it is, we're not just here to provide a product. Yes, we're a software company, but really we're looking to be partners and really advisors, in a way that we're partnering with the hiring company to not only look at how they best utilize our technology, but how do they best utilize, like, optimize that entire workflow, right?
So how do you guys end up scaling this outwards from just the West Coast? I know before we had mentioned that you could partner with places like Glassdoor and ZipRecruiter and things like that. Is there any other opportunities outside of partnering with kind of the bigger, I guess, hiring conglomerates?
Yeah. And I think, again, it's like better understanding the landscape for, for Moss Adams, their workflow and the tools they're using and the systems, the way candidates are applying is radically different than like the home care provider that we're working with, right? So I think the first step is understanding the landscape of what the organization is doing, the types of candidates they're interviewing, and how we then embed ourselves within those workflows, right? I think long term, because HR technology companies, it's very, most of them have open APIs where we can plug and play into their system, really share information in and feed information back out. It makes it really nice and easy to work with these other vendors and really have the holy grail, those end-to-end systems, right? But we do think there's an opportunity to be kind of this conversational layer in many parts of the interviewing process that wraps around the tooling that has really just focused on tracking. So the applicant tracking systems to this day are, hey, the candidate applied, they then were interviewed, they then got an offer, they then accepted the offer, right? But there hasn't really been this automation around some of the interactive experiences, so the screening and the scheduling, and so that's really, we see ourselves plugging into that long term, but then also providing insights throughout the process.
That's perfect. Is there a specific timetable from applying to hearing back from you guys for the screening questions, and then from the screening questions to whether they've moved on to the next round or not?
Yeah, great question. I think it's as quick as possible, right? I think the key is like understanding the intent of the applicant, where they are, right? So the intent of an applicant that is going to an in-person hiring event or going through a drive-through at Starbucks and sees a sign to apply for a job. The intent there might be different than someone who's on their phone going through Facebook and they see a job ad, right? Which is, the intent is very different than someone who just submitted a 20, 30-minute application on someone's career site, right? So the key is, I think there's no perfect answer, but the idea is, hey, how do we understand the intent of the candidate or the applicant, and how do we get to them the fastest, right? So what we typically do is we'll auto trigger emails or text messages directly back out after application. So you'll apply to a job and then you'll get a text message within 5 minutes that says, hey, click this link to have a quick chat and get scheduled for your interview, right? And so the idea is to jump on it as quick as possible, get them scheduled, move them forward in the process, because the idea of time to hire is a key metric we look at and these hiring companies look at, because the faster they can more effectively move these candidates through the funnel, the better they can scale, the better they can operate.
This reminds me exactly. I had a guest on here recently that founded a company called Quotable, which basically is it's optimizing the car quote process, where it's somebody applies and gets a quote, and then it's similar. They get like a text message with all the quotes and like an AI algorithm that can speak with them as well. And so I start seeing these kind of ideas translating to all these different like niched industries in society. And you don't realize how much wasted time there is between waiting around to hear back from them and just everything that kind of surrounds those different ideas. There's so much different there's so much needed optimization in all these industries. So it's really cool to see how AI and machine learning kind of is implemented into these like
Yeah.
crevices.
And I think it's safe to say anyone that's in HR or is a recruiter, like, technology has been slow to get adopted in HR technology versus other industries. Like if you're looking at sales and marketing or other verticals that, they've had the cutting edge technology forever, right? So a lot of it is like, hey, how do we look at what's happening across these different industries, look at what's working, and then optimize it for HR, optimize it for recruiting, and give recruiters and their hiring teams, the tools they need to be successful in the 20 in 2020, I guess now almost 2021, right? Knowing that work is changing and how their interview is changing.
I think this automated process also cuts out the politicization of the HR hiring process, which is something that I talk about all the time on here, is how all these different industries have these political structures that are so unnecessary and have kind of been just in that space or in that business for 10, 20 years that it's kind of hard to kind of rip that politicizing out. But if you automate the process, then not only are you getting the right candidates, but you're also saving a lot of time and reputation that goes into
Yeah.
these different politicking behind the scenes, especially in HR.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And a lot of it, honestly, is not like a lot of it's unconscious, right? Like, I don't think recruiters wake up every day and say, like, hey, I'm going to ask a candidate a different set of questions if they're a different ethnicity, or I'm going to, ask less questions to a female candidate than a male candidate. Like, no one, like, I'll correct myself. Very few people intentionally like have stuff like that. It's mostly unconscious, right? But what can we do using automation and streamlining things to provide an equitable experience in the process? Because that's going to drive better outcomes, higher revenue for the company, and so forth and so on, right? I think, there was a ZipRecruiter study, and this one wowed me when I heard this. Like, and I'd been in HR technology for a long time, but they looked at, something like 75 or 80% of technology job descriptions. So if you were to go on, and it was via ZipRecruiter, you go on ZipRecruiter and look at job descriptions, almost 80% of those job descriptions contain male gendered words like he, or things that trended masculine. And if you simply remove those from the job descriptions and made them neutral, right, 40% more applicants applied to the job. Because I think self-selection is like a real thing we're trying to overcome. In this case, the study was focused on male, female. Like, if candidates can't see themselves in a job or in a job interviewing process, right? Like if African-American or Latina job applicants end up interviewing with 5 white candidates and don't see themselves as an employee, like they might self-select and not continue forward with that, right? And so there's so much we can do around providing an equitable experience in the process, streamlining much of what can be streamlined, and giving everyone that same experience that helps you provide consistency in a way that is necessary nowadays.
Yeah, it's weird, the implied biases that go a lot of times unnoticed, and I know that is something that's been happening within the AI world. That a neuroscientist on here, and he was talking about how a lot of these machine learning and automated algorithms, and some of the computational creations on the screen, they're always scaled as like a white male. And so it ends up having, and you look around in the room and it's all white males who are doing this. And sometimes it's not even purposely done. It's just through ignorance and kind of just like how the process has always been. And then that algorithm tends to only choose white males because of how it was created, and it doesn't know anything differently.
Yeah, and Amazon's a perfect example. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, they had been on this journey to implement an AI technology in hiring. And the whole process of building it and modeling out everything, what they didn't come to realize is that it actually negatively impacted female candidates for engineering roles, right? And it took them launching it and actually beginning to implement it to realize the impact it had. And then they scrapped the entire process. And who knows how many millions or billions of dollars that went into that failed experiment, right? And I think as the end user, you hear about this. As a candidate, you hear about these AIs, and like you hear these stories that scare you, and thinking that there's some like machine that's, there's a right way to do this and a wrong way to do it, right? And I think the challenge we're fighting is right now, on average, a recruiter spends 7 seconds reviewing a resume, right? And like for these high volume, 7 seconds, like they're looking over, and it's not because they don't care. It's not because a recruiter is doing a bad job. They're just being asked to do a million of these things, right? So I think what's hard is like, yes, this idea of AI or some machine having an algorithm might scare you, but also what should scare you is the status quo, is that you're getting 7 seconds with a recruiter, right? So there's a happy medium there where, the machine is not doing everything and taking over the world, but we're giving the recruiters the ability for them to be their best selves, right?
Yeah, I think that just comes down to human evolution, right? It's like when you're selecting a partner, whether you're at a bar or you see like an attractive female, if you're a man at the bar, you usually make a judgment within the first few seconds on whether you'd want to spend your life with her or if you find her attractive or anything like that. So there's a lot of these like superficial structures in society that you don't even realize play into not only just mate selection, but hiring and your perspective on anybody. Like it's such a weird fascination with society.
Yeah. And it's a journey, right? Like no one is perfect, and there's no holy grail. Like I wouldn't be the one to sit here and say humanly is solving the world's problems with diversity and equitability and hiring. No, but I think what we've been focused on is grounding ourselves and picking up in everything we do. We want to take on implicit bias. We want to take on challenges that haven't been able to be solved in the past, knowing that we are a small piece of that process. But if we're able to help fix and automate and streamline things in those little pieces, it's going to overall push everyone forward in a successful way.
And so when you guys are meeting, I guess just like a general team meeting, are you guys, is this conversation that we're having like a general conversation that you have on all these different small niche problems within the algorithm or creating an algorithm that you have to consider? Or is there like some other process, like the studies that you go through, kind of like what is that process to refine the product?
Yeah, I think and again, I'm not on the product side of the house, so I don't want to, for those product managers and engineers out there, hopefully I don't fall on my face here, but I think the first is having having the right people within the team that are keying into the right sets of questions as we go about planning out products and actually building. Like, are we asking the right questions? Are we getting a diverse enough, perspective simply from the team that's planning the products? Or, can we surround ourselves with enough really smart, really successful, really diverse people that are going to shape what it is that this is going forward, right? I think that's the first step. Are we asking, do we have the right people in place? And then are we asking the right questions so we don't fall into the trap that Amazon did, that, they just, the outcome ended up being a negative one and they had to scrap it, right? So I think that's been our focus, right? And we are early days, right? We're a team of 10 or 15 people, right? So we're on a journey ourselves to make sure we're doing things the right way. But in everything we do, we want to make sure we're asking the right questions and challenging ourselves that, hey, if there's something questionable, we're not just going to do it for the sake of doing it because it sounds great or it seems like it's going to be impactful. We want to make sure we do it right.
Right. And like we'd mentioned in the beginning, when you go on this journey, you start to lean on all of your different friends and different networks that you've experienced or been involved with throughout your entire life. And so, as we'd mentioned in the beginning, in January, you went through the Combinator startup process. Do you still refer back to, I guess, the company as a whole or the different networks that you had made through that whole 90-day process that you asked help for?
Yeah. So the network is huge, right? So the idea behind the whole program is, look, you have Y Combinator invest in a part of your company. They get kind of an equity stake for them helping you come along, right? It's almost like graduate school for startups, right? You can call it that, right? So it's a combination of not just the mentorship from the Y Combinator staff, who are all previously successful entrepreneurs themselves, and they help you build connections for fundraising. But it really is like the network above all else. Like, we have access to a database of not just investors, but any company that's previously gone through Y Combinator. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, in the program, cold emailed Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, and literally out of nowhere. And we were, 6 months or 9 months into us as a company. And, because of Y Combinator, Brian Armstrong literally wrote back within a day, right? Whereas if we were not a Y Combinator company, that would have been very different, a different experience, right? So that's just like a little example, but yeah, the network is massive, right? Knowing that there's these hundreds of other companies that have gone through this before, successfully and unsuccessfully. And so any challenge we're facing, any question we have, like, I promise you that someone in the network has done that before and we can lean on it. We were talking about this like in this AEPI networking group, how we got connected, but the same thing, like you can pose questions, you can ask, hey, I have this challenge, how do we go about doing this? And that's very real. And that's the huge value of not just going through that 90 days, but what it means for you as a founder and what it means for your company long-term.
Right. I've learned through my own journey that a lot of times startup companies, they don't really need the capital as much as the network that's provided is what you really need. Like there's so much abundance of capital, and now even with printing of money, there's even more capital out there in the market. But coming along these networks, it takes a while to build. So if you can find yourself a network like Y Combinator, insert yourself in there and skip a lot of these hardships that you experience, whether it's making a bad mistake and losing half of your reserve, or hiring the wrong person. Like you could skip a lot of these processes through Y Combinator. So that's really cool. It's like a startup fraternity, as you're saying.
Yeah. It's been great for us, and it's kind of everything we envision, right? Like I think that the thing I will emphasize here too is that, like, with all this great, like at the end of the day, like it's still you doing the work, right? Like, so anyone that's looking at going into an accelerator program, whether that's Y Combinator or 500 startups or Techstars, or there's a bunch, right? I think the key is having a really clear understanding of what you're hoping to get out of that 90 days, what you're hoping to grow, whether it's getting your product built, or for us, it was, scaling and growing revenue and getting connected to the Coinbases of the world and so forth. But like, so having a clear understanding of what you're looking to get out of the program, so that at every single step of the way, you keep laser focused on what those goals are, and you can track back to it. Because if you go in and you don't necessarily have a clear plan, and you're like, it's very easy to flail, right? And not get out of the program what we were able to get out of, and what other founders have gotten much more than us out of it, right? So yes, it's built in network. Yes, it's great mentorship, but they're helping to pry out what it is of you and your team need to be doing, right? And the emphasis lies on you to actually do the work.
So I got to know, because you're the first person I've talked to that's kind of really tapped into the what I'll call it the West Coast tech industry. Is it really as cutthroat as people make it out to be in the industry? Is it really like a fight for resources, even though there is a lot of collaboration on the superficial level underneath? Is it really as tough as some people like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly tough in a sense that, like, there's a lot of things you got to battle through as a founder. There's a lot of those low moments where, hey, you go in and pitch an investor and they're brutally honest that, hey, this isn't for me, right? So there's a lot of those moments you fight through. But I think at the end of the day, like, if you're genuinely on this journey and you're looking like you're a good person and you have the right intent and you're going about things the right way, I think generally most people give that back to you as well, whether that's Bay Area or outside of the Bay Area, or, I think you certainly need to have a thick skin, right? But I think genuinely, if people believe in what it is you're doing, they're going to, put a hand out to help. Right. And I think Y Combinator is a perfect example, right? They make a call on whether they believe in you as a company or as a founder, and they vouch for you. It's like a stamp of approval, right? They're putting their reputation on the line, saying that Humanly is going to be the next, Workday, right? And they're going to help you along the way. And yeah, there's going to be bumps, and not every intro we get from YC and not every person we meet with is going to be the nicest or going to believe in our idea, but that comes with the territory, right? And if we were in Indianapolis or Miami or wherever, like, the same goes for that, right?
All right, let's say I am a company that was listening to this and I want to apply or ask for Humanly services. What's the back end process to get Humanly adopted into my own business?
Yeah, so the first step would either be emailing me, so Andrew@humanly.io, or you can go on our website, so it's humanly.io. io, and there's a big button right there in the middle that says demo request, and it comes actually right to me anyways. So it's the same as if you were to email me. Now, in terms of like, we sit down and then we audit, hey, depending on how big your company is, we get an understanding of what tooling you're using, what types of candidates you're hiring, and quickly within a couple of weeks we can get you launched and onboarded. Because the cool part about what we're building is it allows me to really advise and get to know all these amazing companies out there that have very unique and different processes, and help them optimize and make the best of what they have.
Yeah, you're basically a master of all industries, kind of like podcasting as well. It's like I'm talking to people of all different backgrounds and jobs and professions and creatorships. And as for you, you're talking to people of all different industries. So you have probably a very specific knowledge, as Naval would say, that's just specific to you that nobody else can really replicate.
Yeah, and I think that also, like, it dispels the notion that, like, and some of this is in HR tech where you have these really smart, and you might have listeners here that are really smart technical co-founders that can build this life-changing AI or machine learning. But as I spoke about, like, you could have the coolest product, the most life-changing thing in the world, but if you walk into a team of recruiters and say, hey, we don't work with anything about your system, you have to rip everything out, and hey, we're going to do it all for you, and that's a really tough sale, right? And so I think one thing is, we've had enough experience, myself, my co-founding team, in HR technology to really understand the ins and outs of the workflows, ins and outs of the industry, so that when we sit down with these people, it's not, hey, check out my cool product that's changing the world. It's, hey, let's look at how our solution can make your process better, right? And if it will make it better, and have an honest conversation around it and be an advisor.
I really feel like this product is such a perfect fit for Vegas. There's hundreds of HR, there's hundreds of HRs throughout every casino, and then even more the corporations. Like, for example, when I was younger, they do a pool hiring fair where you go to like the Caesars HR corporation, and there's literally like thousands of lifeguards that apply, and it would save so much time, so much money, which I know the casinos are trying to save anyways, because let's be real, Vegas was the hardest hit. There's 30.1% unemployment at one point. It was the highest ever for a city. So they're trying to automate different positions away. They started doing this with like the service bartenders, and they're starting to implement it to the reception desk where they're putting kiosks there. And HR seems like it's something that's, like you said, it's kind of been lagging in the technology space, and need to able to automate this process to kind of restart Vegas all over again.
Yeah, if you're a hiring manager in Las Vegas and you're doing hiring and you need help, be happy to reach out. I'd love to help you. The other thing too is there are certain industries it's really tough, right? And I think, we're working with this large home care company, and I think they're looking at creative ways of this idea of reskilling and educating people on this notion that, like, being a caregiver, like pulling off the negative luster of how terrible the job would be, right? It really isn't, right? And if you're in hospitality, you're a people person, or if you worked in hotels, you have so many of these skills that translate. And by the way, the job's really flexible, and you can work nights or work days, or and so there's ways of, like, this idea of reskilling, that it's not just, hey, we have job applicants, we have a job opening, we want to help you better understand that linear action, but how do we look at a candidate holistically and say, hey, maybe we don't have a role as a bartender, or we don't have a role for you, cleaning rooms at this hotel, but by the way, there's these other opportunities at our company that are a better fit for you, or let's look at this other partner that is hiring, right? And so there's ways we can kind of optimize that process and better reskill people and get them allocated towards the right sets of roles.
Yep. Skills are learned. You're not born with it. We're not all born. Everything that you're born with is a little bit hereditary in terms of like your physical stature, but everything is a skill. Speaking is a skill. Learning is a skill. Being the best at it, at whatever profession is, it's all a skill. So, and I think our generation, the millennial generation, is one of the key components of skill learning, because everyone is an entrepreneur. Everyone of our generation has 3 or 4 jobs. And I think the average millennial, I think the job length was only like 2 or 3 years at some point like that. And they kind of move on because there's different things that they're looking for and not just money. And when you take all of these different skills and experiences that you've done, you're basically like a Swiss Army knife where you can just kind of be plug and play into whatever you see, right?
Well, and the right employees understand that and optimize for that, right? Like we weren't the ones to coin this, but we throw this term around a lot, is like employee lifetime value, right? There's a customer lifetime value, but employee lifetime value, knowing what we spoke about earlier, that they're not going to generally be at your company for 20, 30 years the way they were, a decade ago, right? But understanding that, hey, we have that year or two out of them. How do we optimize so we make them the most, they can provide the most impact and move on and bring you the most impact down the road as well.
Yep. That is the perfect site. Before we get out of here, I know obviously you're not from Vegas. And as we spoke before, you said you'd only been to Vegas one time for about an hour. So I got to know, when are you going to come out to the entertainment capital of the world?
I will say there's a ton of HR technology conference. There have been every year, and we were very much planning on 2020 being our year for road shows and coming out to Vegas, and yeah, so that was very much in the plans. And obviously, like most people, COVID has crushed those dreams. But yeah, very much looking forward to it. I've heard amazing things. Yeah, like I said, in college, we were actually on our way to play Southern Utah University, and so we did layover for one night in Las Vegas, but it was like, some cheap motel, and didn't even make it out. I was, 19 at the time or whatever. But yes, very much looking forward to getting back out to Vegas. And there's so much, like, I'd bring my kids and they'd have an awesome time, all the shows and playing games, and my son would love it too. So.
Yeah, well, if you're ever out here, be sure to hit me up. I'd love to take you out, show you around the area. There's much more to Vegas than just the Strip, as some people like to believe that I live on the Strip or in some of the hotels. There's a lot to it. It's a growing industry, and it seems like there's a lot of tech companies that are starting to migrate and film in some of these other places. I see a lot of the benefit out here.
Yeah. Well, now again, with remote work, like, we're a completely distributed company. Like, I'm in Northern California. My co-founders are up in Seattle. We have a teammate down in Los Angeles. Like, you can pretty much work from anywhere now, right? And I think companies are coming to that reality. And a place like Las Vegas, or I know Reno, right? Like, Reno's been booming. Like, a lot of companies, I think it's Tesla opened up a big factory. I know Apple was up there for a while, and so yeah. Who knows? Maybe Las Vegas is in our future. We'll see.
I hope so. Where can I send all of the users and listeners and viewers to learn more about you and Humanly?
Yeah, humanly.io is our website. My name's Andrew Gardner. I'm super active on LinkedIn. So go ahead and find me on LinkedIn, get connected there. We also have a Twitter. So our Twitter's HumanlyHR is our hashtag. But yeah, come check us out. Shoot me an email, andrew@humanly.io. Happy to hop on a call. Or honestly, if it's, hey, if you're a job seeker, you're looking to get some help, like, I'd love to pay it forward and connect you with anyone I can. I know it's a tough time out there, and I'd love to do anything I can do to help.
Heck yeah. Andrew, thank you for coming on. You definitely shared a lot of insight. I really do think that there is definitely a lot of homes for this product in Vegas. I wish you the best, and hopefully once this whole COVID thing kind of goes away, we can connect sometime in person.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we'll be onboarding a bunch of Vegas clients now, and I'll come out to onboard them on site, and we'll go, and you'll show me the real Vegas, and we'll do it the right way.
Yes, I appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you guys. No problem. Thank you guys for listening, and we will catch you next time.